everyone, and welcome to FinTech Festival India's Bengaluru Micro Experience. So you might have noticed a small spring in my step, and why not? Because we are moving every day, we are moving closer to the FinTech Festival India's mega event in Delhi between July 20th to July 22nd, and this event is scheduled to take place at Pragati Maidan, New Delhi. And now, right now, we are back in Bengaluru for this micro experience, and there is something special to this event. This edition of FinTech Festival India's Bengaluru Micro Experience is brought to you by Thales and Exclusive Networks, and today we will be exploring the world of data protection, cybersecurity, and business transformation through our various panel discussions, where the eminent personalities from the Indian FinTech ecosystems will be sharing their thoughts on and their experiences with our audience. So without any further delay, let us move on to our first panel discussion of the day. And this session is aptly titled Priority 1, Data Privacy in FinTech. Joining us on this session, we have Mr. Anil Pinapala, founder and CEO of Vivify India Finance, Mr. Srinath Rajgopalan, Chief Executive Officer, Perfios Account Aggregation Services, and Mr. Ved Prakash, Senior Business Development Manager, Banking and Enterprise India, Thales Group, who will also be moderating this panel. Now, we were also expecting Mr. Gaurav Lahoti, Vice President of Engineering from Khata Book, who was expected and excited to be here with us today. Unfortunately, he had to sit out of the panel due to some COVID-like symptoms that surfaced last night. We wish Gaurav a quick recovery from all our audience, our team, and our panelists as well, and we look forward to hosting him in one of our next events. Nevertheless, we are here, and it is time to kickstart the first conversation of the day. And with that said, the panel is all yours, Mr. Ved, and please take it forward.
Yeah, thanks, Amit, and hi, good morning, everyone, and I welcome you all for joining this very exciting discussion that we will have with Srikanth and Anil on a very important and pertinent topic, which is related to data privacy and protection, especially in the FinTech growth and journey. Now, as we all know, businesses have become data-driven, and data protection is the number one priority for most of the organizations thriving on data today. So how is data privacy really shaping up the business growth, and how it is bringing the trust in the customers, and how it is helping to meet certain obligations from regulatory and compliance mandate, and how the cloud being coming in a big way, where most of the FinTech organizations are cloud born or cloud native. Where is the security aspect getting into? In the sense that cloud, it is where a lot of challenges would be there from getting the visibility about how your data is being stored there, how your data is being used, how the super admins or the privileged users are getting access to those kind of data, and how are you ensuring that you have a control on that data. So that brings one of the key aspects that we have seen coming up in a big way is on data sovereignty, which basically defines that user should have, or the organization should get control of the data rather than entirely leaving it with the cloud service provider. And as such, even cloud service providers also publish something called shared responsibility matrix, where they definitely declare that irrespective of the service environment that you are using, whether it is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, certain obligations on data security would rely with the user rather than leaving all the way to the cloud service provider. So this is in a nutshell to give you an idea what we are going to talk about. And before that, I would like to ask the first relevant question with Srikanth, and understanding what is that data privacy issues or challenges that he feels in his organization growing forward would need to tackle, and that would also benefit a lot of FinTech partners who are looking into this journey. How should they tackle on these kind of challenges? So Srikanth, I would like to start with you, and then definitely Anil, I would request you to add on if there is more to the discussion, in the sense that what would be the top 2 or top 3 kind of challenge that comes to your mind, especially encountered in your growth journey on data privacy part. Over to you, Srikanth.
Thank you, Ved, and thanks for having me on this wonderful panel. If I may, I'd like to answer this question in terms of an opportunity rather than a challenge. I think if you go back to first principles before we talk about our fintechs and our selfish interests, at an economy level, we're trying to solve a very, very simple mismatch that consumers in India today are data rich. They're not yet economically rich, right? People here use GBs and GBs of data thanks to a lot of, cheap data and cheap data plans and all that stuff. They generate a lot of data every day. The question that we asked ourselves is, if indeed I am generating so much of data, number one, do I have control of it? Two, can I use it to my benefit?
Absolutely.
Right? So the balance that we're trying to strike in India is how do you balance between two extremes, right? If you look at the general privacy regulations across the world, there are two extremes. One is the European extreme, which is GDPR, which is extremely, extremely stringent, with the net effect that you don't really have very large tech unicorns born out of Europe, right? Regulations have actually stopped a lot of innovation that could have happened. The other example is in the US, where the consumer is actually the product, right? Your data is your product, and you have some multi-billion or is it trillion data businesses built just on consumer data, right? It's a free-for-all. It's a laissez-faire kind of a regulation. What we are trying to do in India is to strike a balance. And that balance comes from one very simple insight, that at the heart of privacy is consent. Ask me, take my consent before you take any further steps with my data, right? And a lot of debate happened at the highest levels of policymakers, regulations, and we came up with one fundamental market construct called a consent manager, right? Architecturally, if you keep a consent manager separate from the fiduciary of data, which means that I have a separate entity called an account aggregator today, which stands between a provider and a requester of data, but make sure that the data principal, that is me, have complete control of what data I want to fetch, whom do I want to give it to, for what purpose, and for how long, right? By putting me in control of my data, you're opening up a lot more ownership, agency, and you're also making sure that people compete for my business rather than take me for granted, right? So what we're actually going through today, it's not very visible publicly yet. There's a lot, people in the industry understand it. We're actually going through a UPI-like transformation in the data business, right? 2016 UPI went public. Everybody knows the story where it is today.
Absolutely.
Right? Somewhere I read that it is a very significant part of our GDP as well in terms of transaction volume, right? Now imagine what we can do with account aggregator in a much larger data ecosystem. So to sum up, the opportunity in front of us is to put the data principal in charge and in control of her data and what gets and how it gets used. Break down data silos, right? And make sure that people are able to get the best benefit out of their data. It's a completely different paradigm. There is no similarity for it across the world. Just like UPI and NPCI today have no similarities across the world. We're setting up yet another digital public good called account aggregator. Long answer to a very short question, Ved, but I hope this helps.
Absolutely, quite a valuable insight, I would say, coming from Mr. Srikanth, and especially from the ecosystem that you're coming. These are definitely one of the very pertinent issues that need to be addressed. And Anil, would you like also to add or bring up any other points that you feel would also relate on the data privacy challenges for fintech ecosystem?
First up, thanks for having me here, both FinTech Festival of India and the Thales Group. Srikanth obviously touched upon a lot of valuable insights in terms of consent and how the data privacy infrastructure and the data security infrastructure is about to evolve in India. I'd like to take a step back and kind of set some context in terms of history as a fintech player, as a fintech lender, which is what Vivify is through its FlexPay product, addressing the underserved market and bringing credit access to millions of underserved Indians. I think we can break down the history of data privacy and data security, especially in the fintech context, into like 3 different phases. The initial phase is what I would call where there was a lack of everything, like lack of awareness of from the customer side on what is the power of the data they have, and a lack of respect from the business players for that data. So we were, if you look at the initial phase of fintech evolution, it was a take it or leave it. The fintech provider, anyone, was saying, hey, I need access to everything you do, all your data, and if you don't give me that access, you probably don't even download my app or don't even complete my loan application or anything. And essentially saying, I don't respect your data privacy or your data ownership. Only if you give me universal access to everything you do, I will be able to provide my service to you. And the customer also had that lack of awareness, like what is that he controlled? Because this is still like when you're talking 6-8 years ago, it's in the initial phases. People didn't truly realize or recognize the potential of that data and the right they have to the privacy, which incidentally in 2017 Supreme Court declared as a fundamental right, a right to privacy. So that was the initial phase where business goals and opportunities drove the privacy and the data security debate, and where the customer essentially lacked any right to it to a certain degree.
Absolutely, and I think to add on that, it was the P.S. Puttaswamy thing which happened with the Supreme Court judgment on making this as a fundamental right over any other right.
Right.
And exactly in 2017 was this judgment came which changed the way Aadhaar was being used.
Absolutely.
And the Aadhaar ecosystem as such was being safeguarded against going all out on this usage and the number. Totally with you on that.
So the next phase, which we moved from like a business-centric phase to like a compliance-centric phase, which was driven by this judgment, and it was driven by fear of regulation and fear of reputation erosion. Like, okay, now suddenly RBI and every other regulator will now start to put rules. So the players started to kind of self-regulate themselves and try to make sure that we are taking consent and we are trying to make sure that the data is secure, the kind of respect some of customers' right to privacy, but it was coming from a fear standpoint. And also, if you are taking too much data, and especially in the digital lending places, there were a lot of illegal lending apps that mushroomed about a couple of years ago with harmful consequences for the eventual borrowers, because they just took the data, they didn't respect it, and the legitimate players were all coming from a place of fear and trying to make sure they have set processes and compliances in place that respect both privacy and security. But I think the phase that we are about to step into is the best phase of the business, which is where everybody is now recognizing, as Srikanth said, the right to privacy and and who is the true owner of the data. The data principal is the true owner of the data. And someone like Anumati that Srikanth is heading are going to be the intermediaries who are just making sure that there is true consent.
Yeah.
And consent is just not any consent, it's informed consent. It is, sometimes people just take like a universal consent and then proceed with it, and the limitations to consent, where you can use data, how much you can use it, who can use it, whether you can share this or not, all of that needs to be made aware to the consumer.
Absolutely.
And once you do that, here we are now moving to the consumer-centric focus in terms of handling data privacy and data security. And I think this is what will be sustainable. And as Srikanth rightly put, our regulator always has been ahead of time and has always provided us the infrastructure to work with, and Account Aggregator is one such framework which is going to be a game changer, never seen in the world before, and kind of strikes the right balance between the two extremes he pointed out earlier, and hopefully provides a platform on which we can build great fintech companies that solve important problems, but without compromising on customers' rights to privacy and security.
Absolutely, Anil. And I'm totally with you on the aspect that both privacy and security now has to go hand in hand with the digital transformation initiatives. And this would also bring in a security transformation, the way organizations, new age organizations are coming up, where this has to be built by design in the inception phase rather than being an afterthought, which used to be the traditional way of the applications, the way it was designed. And that brings me to a very important question, which again I will come to you, Srikanth, is that the privacy enhancing technologies, especially that really have come up to address these kind of challenges that you called out, which we have also seen from regulators also prescribing it, where technologies like tokenization of the data. If there is a PII data, you have to have encryption around it, and if you're doing an encryption, the risk passed to the encryption keys, how well you are managing those heterogeneous encryption keys in the environment, that would also help you to give a centralized view about it, and then how you're also dealing with the certain need-based aspect, whether it is data masking or whether it is related to data purging. So what would be a perspective from you on these privacy enhancing technologies helping it in that whole framework that you see coming up, and would playing a significant in mitigating this privacy and security risk that exist inherently into the system?
So, great question, Ved. See, I think we look at it very simply. The best security posture for data is to have no data.
Okay.
Right. And there is a reason why the account aggregator got architected in a way where we are data blind. Step back for a moment and actually step forward for another 5 years and imagine the account aggregator framework operating at scale wherever your PII is stored. Today we're talking the financial sector. This architecture is scalable across industries, wherever your PII is present, and you wish to share it with your consent. Now, at that scale, the account aggregator becomes part of public digital infrastructure, right? And it very quickly can become a single point of failure if you're not careful. So at the beginning, I think to Anil's point and your point, that by design, the AA is data blind. What we do is extremely simple. There is a requester of data. Let's say a customer is applying for a loan at Vivify Finance, and she says, I have an account at Bank X. Anil says, okay, I want your data from Bank X for 6 months to process a loan. All that we do is to identify that this customer indeed has an account at that bank. Fetch the data in encrypted form, hand it over to Vivify. Only Vivify has the decryption tokens.
Okay. That's the purpose, that you are not able to see the data while you are facilitating the data exchange between the provider and the issuer.
Absolutely, okay. Right? So we have to be very clear about what our role is. Our role is a consent manager. We are not in the data business.
Absolutely.
Right? So the moment you say that I'm data blind, and only a regulated entity such as Vivify Finance can actually see the data, you're ensuring two things. You don't have a massive central pool of every data, which is a single point of failure. You've avoided that risk. And two, as a regulated entity, the FIU or the requester of data is also accountable to its own data privacy and security policies. So end to end, the system is designed in a way where not just consent, not just privacy, but also security is baked in. Right? And this is one of the aha moments that I personally had when we were at the design phase of this whole ecosystem. Because as an entrepreneur, your first reaction, gut reaction, is to say that data is the new currency, data is the new oil, and what are we doing in an ecosystem where there is no data? Then the aha moment happened that actually we're not in the data business. We are just consent managers. We are a very, very fat pipe between fiduciaries which own and which store and use data. And by removing this risk of data leakage, that's another way of growing customer trust.
Absolutely. So I definitely understand, especially in your business model and a typical scenario where you are data blind and your growth is not about utilizing those data, but exchanging the data between the interested parties.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I think, Srikanth, then will that pass on the accountability on the data principal who is owning or who is sharing the data to you, to look into these privacy enhancing technologies, because post consent, which is the first step of the data privacy measure, which you have taken it up, and you need to then pass the information to the data principal who are sharing those information. In that case, these technologies you feel would have to be in place with respect to the business processes that they are having to share this data. Absolutely. For the use cases that customer would be interested to look at.
Allow me to future gaze a little bit.
Yeah.
What we've solved is the consent layer.
Right.
What we're also working on in parallel is the usage environment. Right? There are already technologies available like confidential computing.
Correct.
Where you can actually put a rules-based engine in that environment, right? And the requester of data only gets the finished product, the decision.
Correct.
And not the data, right? It's a little early to talk about it yet. There are multiple moving parts, and there's a lot of consensus that needs to be built for this to become a reality. But we're cognizant of the problem that not everybody has the same awareness of data privacy like people in this room, right? The average person just step out of this hotel room and ask anybody on the street. I mean, it's a very, very foreign concept, right? In fact, one of our customers was telling us they ran a survey on their customer base with about 1,000 customers. They asked a very simple question: your bank transaction data, who owns the data? Less than 46% said, I own the data. Right? So there is a huge awareness and education problem to be solved. What we're also working on in parallel is that once the data is decrypted by the requester, how do you put controls, technology controls in place so that it is not misused even unintentionally?
Got it. So Anil, I have the second question which is now coming, is that we are foreseeing a lot of new cyber threat attacks shaping up in terms of ransomware and data breaches. How do you see these as also issues that fintech ecosystem needs to consider in addressing these kind of threats, and what do you think would be the right technology adoption or controls to prevent these kind of scenarios?
See, on this specific issue with respect to ransomware and overall threat to data security itself, I was surprised to hear, maybe not entirely surprised, but 2021, India had the highest rate of ransomware attacks.
Absolutely, it's one of the top 3 countries being affected by ransomware.
So obviously, as a company that is accessing and making decisions, accessing PII data, it is of immense importance for us to make sure that we are protecting our consumers' data, our own business intelligence that is baked into it. See, there are multi-levels, right, for any kind of data security approach. One is philosophically, organization needs to understand that, hey, this is a problem that needs to be addressed. At which time, it's a question of bringing in the right tools and technologies. Obviously, there are a lot of available set of technologies that can be implemented to detect breaches, to address breaches, but also something that is kind of maturing a little bit in our economy, but is available at scale in larger economies, is the insurance aspect to it. So you also need to make sure that you are having proper insurances in place to make sure that when you are subject to certain attack like this, that you are not caught off guard. So all of these measures come from the intent of the organization, especially if you are someone who is requesting data in the world that Srikanth described from the fiduciary. The responsibilities to make sure that the processes are mature in terms of who is decrypting it, how it is being used, and irrespective of as and when the confidential computing kind of environment is centralized, as a user today we have to do it so that our individual users or individual employees are not accessing the true data. It's done in a confidential computing manner, and most of the outputs are just being decision points that have come through a machine.
So I got you, Anil. So what is that from the technology consideration as preventive controls you would be suggesting, or you would be feeling that this would be the mechanism to counter this kind of threats? Because ransomware is again a rogue encryption. That only works when you don't have a good encryption in place. They come and do it because you have not done it, and then they demand the money or reputational loss around publishing that data. So I wanted to just understand if you foresee that these preventive techniques or the privacy enhancing technologies like tokenization encryption would solve this kind of threat scenarios, or there are more to it that also needs to be adopted?
See, this is, I mean, you kind of always have this philosophy wherein the people who are trying to steal from you are always 2 steps ahead of you.
Correct.
So you make use of the technology and tool sets that are available today to kind of protect yourself, but it's always a great unknown. The ransomware attack of 2021 will not be the same as 2022 because everyone plugged that hole either using tools, processes, or technologies. But the next phase of evolution will be something different. And it is important for you to have very good cybersecurity partners, people who understand it. I don't want to sit here and pretend that as a fintech lender, we are also really mature cybersecurity people. There are experts in that area, and it's important for people to evaluate and understand the right tools, technologies, people, and processes to be put in place so that you kind of are ensuring to a large degree that you are protecting yourself from a severe data breach or a ransomware attack or anything like that. So I think it's about going through proper evaluation and finding the right tools and technologies. And there are a lot of them, and your organization is an expert at this.
Sure.
But there are several organizations that provide a wide-ranging
technology and solution around it. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing this view, Anil. And I think there is another topic which most of the cloud native organization would like to hear. And Shrikant, this is a bit off from the business that you are managing, but if there are any thoughts on how do you see managing security in cloud environment? Now, this is something where I am saying that 2 aspects come in. One is security of the cloud, and one is security in the cloud. Now, security of the cloud is simple. Cloud service providers will take ownership. But when it comes to security in the cloud, and for cloud-born fintech organizations who would come for a service also to take from an account aggregator like you, how do you see that there are certain challenges in the cloud environment should be addressed or considered for them? And if there are anything that comes in your mind, feel free to share for the benefit of audiences.
Okay, I'm drawing a little bit from my past experience, having served in a role at AWS. See, I think the first realization is the mindset of cloud native organizations is that of cloud enables rapid innovation, frugal, experimentation. So the biggest conversations in the cloud domain are all about innovation, speed, frugality. At the click of a button, you can spin up a couple of environments, try a few experiments. If it doesn't work, shut it down. Your cost of innovation goes down. But what people have also realized that speed of innovation comes with a responsibility to drive within the lanes, right?
Right.
The challenge that we see is the the developers who actually innovate on the cloud are all about, the next big thing, the next innovative, cool new app that I can develop, right? They need a counterbalance of that DevOps guy or that CISO who's going to make sure that, yes, innovate, but responsibility, don't leave the gates open, right? And there are the other extreme of very large enterprises who still are, beginning to understand that it's a shared responsibility model, right? So I'm going back some 6-7 years when cloud was very, very still, nascent in India. The mental model that we painted for our customers was, I can build you a Volvo, I can build you a tank,
Right.
but hey, you got to wear the seatbelt, right?
Correct.
So I think that stage has been crossed. There is a lot that is getting invested in training and tools that the cloud service providers provide to their clients, so that even by design. So, for example, one of the very large banks that used AWS actually had a security policy that if somebody spins up an instance which is not encrypted, number one, shut it down.
Absolutely.
Number two, send that guy for training.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right from the perspective of training and being aware of how to
Exactly.
have the right configurations in the cloud environment, and especially how to ensure that certain security controls which exist in cloud environment can empower that control to you.
Absolutely.
Especially like approach of bring your own keys, which helps you to enable the customer control of the encryption
Correct.
keys rather than the cloud service provider managing it on their behalf. So while you use the encryption given by cloud provider, but the control of the keys would lie in your domain, in your position, rather than leaving it. And I have seen this as one of the very safeguard mechanisms
It's a
to
trade-off,
address
right?
the data sovereignty part as well, and help organizations who are cloud native in terms of
It's
managing
actually a
this.
trade-off here.
Yes.
What we realized was a lot of young fintechs with very, very frugal operating budgets don't have the bandwidth for the BYOK environment.
Correct.
They would rather leave it to the cloud environment and make sure they've configured it right. When you get to enterprise level clients, that's when this, bring your own key, they have the right resources, and have a lot more at stake. So that's when the, balance shifts.
Absolutely, Srikanth, and especially when you have scale up and spread to multi-cloud environment.
Multi-cloud,
then these are the kind of
multi-location,
controls
absolutely.
that, totally with you on that. And definitely to start up, I would also like to add that initially the way concept was DevOps, which was there to, but now it has become DevSecOps for nimble organizations who are currently coming up and looking into building security from the start itself, rather than taking care. And I think this is where the way forward, which is helping most of the new age organizations to meet these kind of challenges concerning on data security. Anil, I am coming to the question from the perspective of regulatory guidelines and compliance ecosystem, and your organization definitely been falling under certain those prescribed guidelines, primarily to the India context, I would say. How do you see that those guidelines are also enforcing both to address the business risks that your organization faces, and help you to strengthen the technology controls in that business process?
Yeah, I mean, as a regulated entity, as regulated by RBI, there are a set of clear policies and procedures RBI has set up under the IT security policy that an NBFC needs to follow. Even though we are a fintech, we are also licensed as an NBFC, so we kind of follow all of those guidelines.
Okay.
But apart from that, as a digital lender, RBI has set up a working group, and working group has come up with its set of recommendation which are trying to address these same questions of privacy and security, and also to a certain degree legality. In fact, RBI in the digital lending working group has built up a concept called Digita, which is supposed to be this umbrella organization that will verify the legitimacy of any lending app that
Okay.
is being published in India today, not just through the one through the lens of licensing and legality of the operation, but also two in ensuring compliance of both privacy guidelines, security guidelines that RBI has set for either a fintech player or NBFC player or a traditional bank to operate in a digital lending environment. So that working group committee's recommendations at some point will be transformed into rules, and when that happens, I think it provides a very trustworthy third-party stamp on any lending app within India, so that the customers can first access the app with a sense of trust, and then with a consent mechanism which is kind of decentralized and is being managed by someone else, have that trust come in, so that the consumers are able to trust the fintech players, the innovators, as well as the traditional players, providing them services at a much better level.
Okay, great, absolutely. So I think with the interest of time, we would like to wrap up the valuable inputs that just Anil and Srikanth have shared. And there are certain questions also from the audiences that have come. I think we can take it up and then maybe we can just call it, summarize the discussions as we discuss. So I would just like to take the first question, which talks about what would be the approach of startups like Pismo resonate with data governance players. Pismo is world's best transaction engine which empowers payments. So this is one question that has come up. Srikanth or Anil, you have any kind of thoughts around it?
I apologize, I don't have the context.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the
So
context.
data governance players, in fact, I am also not sure what aspect is that being considered from the question side. Okay. So I think second question is particularly for Srikanth on the aggregator thing that you had called out. What is that? One of the participants want to know what exactly is this fulfilling the business requirement and how it works.
Okay. I know we have less than 2 or 3 minutes, and I'll try and keep it short. Essentially, an account aggregator is a citizen's charter, right? It is a tool that helps you and me, people who own our own data, to discover what kind of data I have with 10 banks or 5 insurance companies, right? Link them and aggregate them in one place in an app that someone like Anumati provides, and then make a decision, whom do I want to share that data with? Right? If I'm applying for a loan, I would apply and I would share my bank statement. If I'm an SME, then I would probably share my bank statement and a GST return, all through the account aggregator framework, right? So essentially, an account aggregator framework is a regulatory mechanism that simplifies the aggregation of, as the word defines it, from different data sources and puts me in charge of sharing that data. From someone like an there are 2 terms you should be familiar with. One is a financial information provider, or the FIP. In simple terms, that's, let's say I have my account in SBI, so SBI is the FIP. And maybe I'm applying for a home loan from HDFC, and HDFC wants my data. HDFC is the FIU, right? What it does for an FIU is to make sure that the data is coming straight from the source, right? There is no tampering in between. You'll be surprised at the kind of frauds that happen on PDF statements which people normally use. So it does a lot of, it has a lot of value for the FIU. It's straight from the source. It is authentic. It is immediately machine readable, and it comes to you within, early experiments show 30 to 35 seconds, right?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, the world is moving towards instant gratification even in loans, right? This is one huge tool that enables FIU. So, in short, an account aggregator, if you remember nothing else, is a citizen charter.
Great.
I'll quickly add to Srikanth's point. As a lender, we and a lot of our peers are already using a lot of this data. What account aggregator is doing is putting the power of that consent and sharing of the data in the hands of the user. And secondly, for a financial information user like ourselves, it is giving authenticity, that hey, we can trust this data. Just because a customer has shared a PDF bank statement doesn't mean it is authentic. There is a high level of fraud that is seen, and everybody is building their own tool sets to overcome that. So yeah, the most important aspect is to give the power back to the consumer, and that's what they are doing.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
So I think we can we have addressed these questions, and we can do a wrap up. Just 1 minute that I will take to summarize what Srikanth and Anil have called it out. In crux, what I heard and feel is that the data protection would primarily be the key responsibility area for at the source or the principal who are storing it, safeguarding it. For them, definitely they need to have those controls in place. And for data minimization would be one of another aspect to look where you can see which all the business processes doesn't require those data unnecessary, do not get into those data collection which results in implications. And last, yes, the overall privacy and security has to be considered in inception, and that would safeguard against any of the emerging threats and compliances that would mandate those controls in place. So with this, I would like to thank the panel members for joining this panel discussion, and thanks all the audiences for listening to us, and feel free to connect with us for any other specific queries, and we would definitely look at it and come back to you. So over to you, Amit.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ved, Mr. Anil, Mr. Srikanth, for a wonderful panel discussion here and sharing the insights and the intricacies on the data protection and data privacy for the consumers.